Hey everyone, we're going to be reviewing the movie called The New World, which is a story of the English settlement in Jamestown. Here. So this movie came out in 2005 and was directed by Terrence Malick, who is kind of known for his beautiful shots and cinematography and um, stuff of that sort. So you could definitely see that evidenced in the movie itself. It starred Colin Farrell, Christopher Plummer, Christian Bale, August Schellenberg, Wes Studi, and Koryanka Kilcher, which was the 14-year-old actress that played Pocahontas. A little plot summary for you. So basically, the English come on the conquest in 1607 and arrive in Jamestown at the coast where they are greeted. There are clashes with them in the beginning, and John Smith gets taken hostage eventually, but his life is saved by Pocahontas, the chief's daughter, who kind of takes his favor. And during his time that he's held captive there, he's kind of like initiated into the tribe and learns more about it and kind of learns their ways and gains a respect for them. And he's the protagonist in the movie and is kind of portrayed as like the nice colonists, as compared to like all of the other Englishmen that come alongside him that don't really understand the Powhatan people. But eventually, Pocahontas like develops a little relationship with him. It doesn't really go anywhere, and he like fakes his death, and she marries someone else from the English colony. But eventually, they meet up again in England.
As for the cinematography and the cinematic experience, we both thought that it was beautifully shot. There was a lot of scenes of kind of meadows and just nature in general, and the native people kind of portrayed as like being one with nature. And you could tell the director took a lot of care in striving for the accuracy of the Powhatan tribe, uh, as they got historic archaeologists to kind of show them like the language and such. But we thought that the movie was kind of slow developing with an unclear direction, so you weren't really sure, like what the story of Pocahontas would be and who she would end up with, whether it be with John Smith or John Wolfe, I believe. Uh, and it also depicted a romance that most likely never happened between John Smith and Pocahontas.
As for the aspects of conquest, culture contact, and colonialism, we had a little bit to work with for that. So the conquest was kind of portrayed as, a natural thing that was supposed to happen, and the land was like a gift from God. And they talked a lot about it being the promised land and kind of felt a right to take ownership of it, similar to like the Spaniards that we're learning about um, in Peru. So they also had kind of like a difficult contact with them eventually, but it did start out as peaceful and like they were kind of both like entranced by each other, like very mesmerized, you could say, with one another. But this isn't necessarily like historically accurate per se because the English had actually been up and down the coast near Jamestown for nearly 100 years at that point. So the Powhatan people had most likely seen Englishmen before, and the Englishmen had most likely seen or heard about the Powhatan people before. So the gotcha. Yeah, so the Europeans, namely the English people, had been up and down the coast of the the East for nearly 100 years at that point. So the Powhatan people had most likely um, instead of like describing like it in a historically accurate perspective.
And for colonialism, the way it was displayed in the movie, it was seen that the Englishmen kind of had a difficult venture for them as they lacked supplies and resources to take care of themselves when they first arrived. Uh, but that changed immediately when the Englishmen immediately started using the land and resources of the native people with little to no pushback, except for at one point when one of the natives, which they said named the Naturals, were caught stealing a hatchet, and then they immediately killed them, which kind of forced like a power imbalance between the Englishmen as they had guns and the natives were armed with spears. And another point was when they tied up natives and kind of forced them to show them up and down the shoreline as they went to look for new resources and possibly other tribes in the area.
As for materiality, there wasn't much to go off of in the movie, probably because the Powhatan people are displayed as these people who have like no sense of possession. So they don't have many like artifacts with them, so to speak, or kind of items of importance so much, but they do seem to value feathers. At one point, they're traded iron pots in exchange for something from the English. And one other possible significant material thing was the bestowing of a staff to John when he in taken by the tribe, and they're kind of like they kind of warm up to him and accept them into their tribe by bestowing the staff to John. And that's kind of like a significant moment in the movie when he kind of becomes one with them and they make peace among themselves. So stereotypes in this movie, I was a little concerned before watching it because it came out in 2005, so I was a little worried that the stereotypes would be more harmful than they actually were. Overall, this movie did a pretty good job in portraying the Powhatan tribe in an accurate and respectful manner. And I think that is mostly because the director took went through the lengths of like consulting people to teach the language of the Powhatan tribe to the actors that played in this movie. So they did a pretty good job depicting the indigenous people for the most part. And they are described as gentle and loving with no sense of possession by John Smith. And while this is like a positive thing, I think they're kind of portrayed as a bit naive in the eyes of the English, which is kind of a harmful stereotype that I observed. There is also a scene where there's the Powhatan people are speaking in a pattern of yelling, and it kind of causes the Englishmen to stare at them kind of bewildered, which is kind of a little instance of maybe like an inaccurate depiction of these people, because it's kind of hard to say like how exactly they acted and due to their historical erasure. So it's kind of, not sure if that needed to be included in there or if it's even accurate.
And for the Europeans, we saw that they were mostly seen as dirty and helpless and cruel to the natives, minus the exception of John Smith, uh, who played into sort of the white savior trope. And one of the quotes that I thought was interesting was uh, when the colonists were kind of describing how they wanted the colony to be. They said they were going to do so with hard work, self resilience, and virtue, which we found interesting considering they took most of the resources from native people and they weren't able to fend for themselves, which is kind of painting a picture of like the bigger picture of colonization and how a lot of European colonists uh, kind of enslaved native people and others to do the work for them. And another stereotype, like I said, was the white savior trope of John Smith, who was seen as the kind colonist, uh, as he was respecting and kind of absorbing the native culture through his own kind of curiosity, I guess, of them, rather than, being seen as cruel. And the presentations of landscapes was a big part of this film, as most of the film was kind of shot in like these meadowy kind of grasslands. Um, and the indigenous landscapes are represented as kind of clean and beautiful and well cared for before the colonists arrived. And they seemed to live in harmony with the land and they didn't needlessly destroy it. Uh, and at one point, I believe John Smith is showing Pocahontas a book of kind of like London and such. And he shows like an English town and it immediately pans to like the meadow. And it kind of showed how, with colonist expansion, there was like a slow and gradual erosion of the land and kind of like painting the picture that like the colonists tainted it in a way uh, with their expansion and their extended stay. And one scene that I thought was especially poignant was when Pocahontas was kind of like walking back to her tribe, I believe at one point. She walks through a bunch of like deforestation. So there's just like her walking amongst the dead, walking amongst a bunch of dead trees.
So this film had a few connections to our class discussions that we've previously had. One of the main ones was the use of religion as a tool in conquest. So basically, they kind of felt that, well, the English felt that they like earned or were somehow like given the land to conquer and make use of by God, which is why the reason kind of why they're there. And there's like a lot of quotes from the Bible by like the colonists as they're talking to the colony about what they're doing, why they're there, and kind of what their goals were. Another connection was kind of the telling of history, and how we're kind of left to guess many details about this time period in history and the time period of colonization, because the stories are all told from the eyes of the colonizers, which are not always accurate, are always, like they have their own personal vested interests in like what they write down, what they describe, and it's hard to like paint a picture of what exactly happened at this point in history. So we're left to guess many details of the Powhatan tribe itself. But I feel like this movie did a pretty good job using what they had to depict the Powhatan tribe as justly and accurately as it kind of could or was allowed to, based on the little evidence that we have from history.
And our connection to the seven myths of the Spanish conquest, we chose to do chapter 7, which is basically about how it describes similar feelings of European superiority and native inferiority, and how that was in favor from God. So, kind of like manifest destiny in a way. And a quote I thought was really important was that the Spaniards conquered natives because they were superior, and they were superior because they conquered natives. And I feel like that in the film, it's portrayed by how the Englishmen kind of were like on an even playing field at first when they first arrived on in Virginia, but then they quickly started to expand and kind of create their own little stake of the land. And they immediately showed that, like, we're willing to like fight you for this, and we can because we are superior. And that kind of led into the civilization versus barbarism that was part of this chapter. And yeah.
Yeah, especially with like the juxtaposition between like John's book and Pocahontas, like the clean fields without any evidence of human interference, and then like, civilization. That was definitely evident in the movie. All right, our conclusion here. Overall, I feel like this movie does a pretty accurate job in describing what it's supposed to be describing. The director consulted with historical archaeologists. He, tried to make the tribe depicted as accurately as possible and the English depicted as accurately as possible. However, the movie itself is a little bit dull in my mind. Despite like the beautiful cinematography and everything, I feel like it kind of gets a little convoluted and misdirected in the way that you kind of can't really tell like what the point of the movie is, or like where it's going at any given time, because the direction shifts from like colonization to like a romance that never really happens to like a new romance that comes out of nowhere. So it's just kind of confusing, and it is a really long movie, and I feel like it could be shortened very easily.
Yeah, and adding on to that point, with the plot points kind of being convoluted, if the story of Pocahontas and John Smith was real, which is highly debatable and probably false, it shouldn't be celebrated, as John Smith is probably like 30 and Pocahontas is supposed to be a young Native woman. So that kind of just ties in more to the fact of European domination over Native peoples. So maybe that's not the best point to add in the film, or at least that's what I thought. But overall, I feel like this film does a better job at portraying Native people in a way that isn't as offensive, or kind of just like a jumble of like Native caricatures or stereotypes that other movies that are based on this Pocahontas and John Smith story do.
Definitely. All right, thank you guys for watching.